Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Tom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
All right, everyone, welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast. I am your host, Thom Jennings, and as has been the case, we try to alternate between episodes where it's just me and episodes where we have a guest. And so far, I've had some great guests, and I think that we'll continue that tradition. And the person that we have on today, I always called him Greg, but he prefers Gregory Hallock. And I met him at the Genesee Orleans Arts Council, better known as Go Art, which is over near, well, the town is Batavia, so it's dab smack between Rochester and Buffalo, New York. And Greg's a great guy. I've joked with him. One of the running jokes that we had for a long time is he doesn't like to be hugged by strangers, and I've tried to get him out of that. So I would tell people to hug him, and he would get upset about that. Is that still the case, Gregory?
Yeah. It's not just strangers. It's just like in general, I don't like to be hugged. I'll hug my kids and my significant other, but that's about where it ends.
That's where it ends. Well, why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself beyond your role at Go Art and maybe a little bit of background about you.
About me.
About you.
Okay. So I am from this little town called Delavan, which is halfway between Buffalo and Olean, New York. It's in the Pioneer School District. I was a math and science major in high school, but I love doing musicals. I applied to some programs, got into ESF, got into UB and all different stuff for environmental science and for architecture and also engineering. And then I decided to be a theater major. So I didn't go to any of those schools, went to GCC because it was the cheapest, got my associates, and then went on to Brockport to get my bachelor's in theater, and then I minored in dance. Then from there, I moved to New York City and was auditioning, and then life took me to Hawaii to help out a friend, and I ended up meeting my future partner there, and stayed there for a couple years, and then moved to California for a little bit, and then came back to New York because I was looking to go to grad school for arts management, and there was only, I think, like 8 schools at the time in the U.S. that offered the specific degree that I was looking for, and UB was one of them, and they were the cheapest. So I came back to New York, got my residency in New York State again, and then applied to that program and got in, and then got my master's. And we decided at that point, while I was working on my master's, that we would take the classes to adopt a child. And we put in our paperwork and thought it would take a couple of years. We got picked the next day, had a kid. 2 weeks later, they called us, said, the birth mother wants you in the delivery room. We went down. I cut the umbilical cord. We had to wait the 3 days for her discharge from the hospital, but then we brought her home. So then that kept us here for a little bit because my family was within an hour drive of us. So we stayed here for a little bit with plans on moving to California. But then since we were staying, my partner decided to go to school and get a degree. And since he was going to school, I decided to look for a job while he was in school. And I applied for a job out in Batavia And then I was started as the assistant director at GoArt, and then just over a year later, I became the director. So that's a quick summary of my life. There's a lot more positive and a lot more negative things that happen, but that's a good summary of it.
Yeah, I guess I didn't realize that you were assistant director, and we met. I think you had become director at that point. I was discussing building a website for the Arts Council.
I was assistant director when we met because Jen Gray was the director.
Oh, you are correct, boy. And I should remember that because I really like Jen. She was a nice lady. Well, I'm sure she still is. She's not dead, so we don't want to say anything bad about Jen. But yeah,
no, she is pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's you mentioned that you had all this theater experience and everything, and so right now your official title is executive director, correct?
Yes.
It really, I guess one of the things I want to start talking about, and I definitely want to get into the parenting thing too, because you have 2 kids now, and all the challenges that maybe came with adopting children and all that. But I want to start out talking about you stepped into an organization, and I know Jen was a great executive director as well, but there was an organization that had a lot of problems, especially financially, and I think there was a lot of stress associated with that. I served on the board at the time, and certainly I had some insight into some of the stuff that had happened beforehand. But how were you able to kind of keep your wits about you? You had to deal with your family dynamic. I suppose on some level you had to set aside some of your personal dreams because it sounds like with you being a theater major, you probably would have rather had a theater job, and then still keep this organization from just imploding, because when I was there, it almost felt like it was going to implode any second.
So first, I have to say that it was pretty much made clear to me when I got the job that the intention was for me to eventually take over. That Jen was just here to get me to know the community because, I did go to GCC, but I was going mostly to Arcade Campus and hadn't been here for more than a couple years, so I didn't know, well, I guess 4 years, but I hadn't been here since 2004. So I didn't know anybody anymore. And they wanted me to get to know the ropes first. So when I took over, there was a sit down and we weren't doing good. I think it's pretty much clear in the community that we were at the closing stages. And I said, if I'm going to sit down and do this and put my all and put 80 hours a week in, I need to know that I have backing. And the board did. They backed me, and I put in the work and got one incredible donor that gave us matching opportunity. And I was able to raise the $50,000 in matching funds. So that ended up saving us. And we've never been in a place where we're like, we have tons of money, we're all good. We're still working our way up there, but that saved us. And I did. I started here. I was never on anxiety meds until I started working here. It's put some stress on me. It makes it really hard. No, I never put under 65 hours a week ever, and trying to raise 2 kids, it is a challenge doing that. Theater is completely gone from my life. I love to attend, gone from it in the sense of me acting or performing. I do volunteer at Shays whenever there's a show on a Tuesday night. I volunteer, and that's my way of getting that in. Also, because I work for a nonprofit, I don't really have lots of spare money. So that's my way to get to see the shows for free. But I don't do the acting anymore. And that's not just to do with my job. It's to do with my kids as well. I was in the show, and I've never quit anything in my life. But when I got my second child and he had some things to work through because he was through foster care, I had to quit the show that I was in because I just could not do it. I could not take care of my children, take care of the job, and be there. And before, I was so lucky that my daughter was able to attend every rehearsal with me, and she was able to entertain herself and be fine and sit in the audience and be great. And that opportunity wasn't there with my second child. So I had to give it up, and I didn't really want to, but I don't regret it. I love my job. I love my kids even more, So they're 100% worth it. And maybe someday I'll go back to doing a show. But right now, it's not my priority. But I'm sure I'll get to do it again someday. And I still have that chance of being on Broadway and being in another movie. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been in similar situation. I had a kid when I was really young. I mean, my oldest son was born when I was 17. And obviously, I dropped out of high school. So I put a lot of my life on hold to have kids. But yeah, I agree with you. There's something about, I guess there really is two types of parents out there. The ones that are just really invested and just feel that energy and that love from being a parent. And it kind of makes it hard to look at some of the parents that don't. I mean, you mentioned that your youngest was in the foster care system, and on some level that had to be pretty gut wrenching for you to know that your child had to experience that. But at least now he's got somebody that's some stability and someone that loves him, right?
Yeah. I mean, he went through a lot, and it wasn't necessarily from the foster system. He just went through a lot. And I mean, there's days that things are really hard, but you sit back and you're like, I can't be mad. Like, this kid has gone through so much in his life, and yeah, but I mean, he's worth every second. And he's amazing. Like, I just recently, my dog has a, what am I trying to say? She has a tumor on her leg, and she's at the end of her life expectancy. And the vet said it was going to be $1,000 to remove the tumor to begin to tell me what's wrong with the dog, what the tumor is, if it has cancer, if it's going to be worse. And I mean, I don't want to say it, but as a parent that has a budget, I sat there and was debating on whether I could afford to do this and make this happen. And my son, who I did not mention this to, came to me and said that I have money that I want to give you because I know it's really expensive and I want you to be able to get her checked out. And I mean, this kid is a heart of gold, no matter what he's gone through, he has a heart of gold. And there are days that, yeah, he drives me up the wall. but yeah, but he's worth every second. I can't wait to see what they become. He's really good at arguing. So he says he wants to be the president. So he might go via a lawyer first and then be the president. Or he might be a stunt actor, or because he is really good at doing stunts. So yeah, I can't wait.
Or maybe he'll be a podcast host. Who knows? That could be. You've got a podcast studio at Get Go Art, so that would be a good start for him.
It would be. Well, I mean, really hoping that we get to be in a show together. I have been forever writing a musical, and if I can just get my butt in gear and get it really down on paper instead of just an outline, I've been writing the next Disney musical, and he's going to voice a character. My daughter's going to voice a character. I'm going to voice a character. We get to be in a show together, and then that'll be like my ultimate dream, to be able to do acting and to have my kids involved with it too, and then to be famous and have lots of money and be able to pay my bills.
Well, speaking from experience, I've any time that I've had the opportunity to play instruments and like in a band situation, it's usually some kind of temporary setup, but there's nothing like it. I mean, it's such a beautiful experience, and I think that it's really nice for me to listen to you talk about that and looking forward to it, because I can tell you, when you do things like that with your kids, I don't know, there's nothing like it. There's no drug, there's no anything that makes you feel better than that. So I'm really happy for you as far as how things have worked out with you and the kids, because I know when we met, you didn't have kids, and that was something that you wanted. So it seems like that part is coming together for you well.
Yes.
So then, back to Go Art. I mean, and there's a lot of people out there. I mean, I think there's some misperceptions about, and actually, let me back up a second. You did make a comment about the foster system. And I want to qualify that statement by saying that, yeah, there's great foster parents out there. God bless them for being there. But unfortunately, a lot of these kids get into the system because of things that have happened before they got into the foster system. And even the best foster parent, I mean, the reality is that a child wants that stability and not to be in the foster system. So I'm not knocking the system. I'm glad that it exists, and I'm sure you feel the same way as well. But that was more of a statement to say that it's, that if a kid has foster parents, some kind of trauma has likely happened in that child's life. And it may just be great parents that passed away, and there's nobody to take care of them. But, it's tough on a kid on many levels.
No, it is. I mean, we were his 8th household.
Wow.
He lived in. So yeah.
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 That's crazy. So again, talking about not-for-profits, I think it seems to me like sometimes there's two types out there. There's the ones that have more than enough money and they don't even know what to do with it. And then they pay everybody these extravagant salaries and they really act like a for-profit organization. But the one that you're the head of, I mean, like you said, I mean, you really have to kind of be scrappy to run a place like GoArt because like you said, you're almost living paycheck to paycheck. For all intents and purposes, unless things have changed a lot since I was on the board. But, I mean, I wonder, would you ever be willing to give that up for something that was a little bit larger and a little bit more stable? Because I think there's a part of me that thinks that the whole instability and the challenge is what drives you in life.
That's a loaded question.
Well, I know it is, and I don't want it to put it out there like Gregory's looking for another job for GoArt, and I'm sure that people from GoArt will be listening. That's not the intent of the question. In many ways, it's kind of steering you to the point that, again, I think some of the challenge is what drives you, and I don't know that you'd necessarily be happy in an organization that was more stable, or maybe I'm completely wrong, but you can answer me either way.
So I love what I do. I would love to obviously have more money, but I still love what I do. I have had job offers that do pay significantly more, but there's a lot of decisions in that. Like I'm currently raising my 2 kids on my own, and doing that and going, these job offers were like farther away, and being around family is a good thing, and traveling makes that hard. But then you have to sit there and realize, okay, benefits are nice. This amount of money is nice, but then ultimately I love my job, So I don't know. I can't say that there's never the perfect thing won't come. I mean, no, actually I know that it could come, because in my head, I am going to my I don't want to say my next husband, but my next husband is going to be the future president of the United States, because I think that I would be one rockin' first man, and I would have an awesome charity. I would have arts and culture as my charity, arts, culture, and diversity, and I could rock that role. So that's the role that I'm currently looking for. But I feel like if I make it to president, I can leave GoArt in good hands, knowing that I hopefully have some money to have made it that far. And yeah, so that's the thing that I'm looking for. But until then, I have a 30-year plan to stay at GoArt and rock this place out and bring it to something amazing. I would like to get to the point where everything's happening. I know that, like what you said, my mom, I'm always like, what do I do when I've reached it all? My mom's like, I don't think that's possible. I think you will always find more things to do and more challenges to bring. So I don't know. I don't think I've answered your question, but.
Well, you did, but I don't think you know that you answered it. I think you answered it when you said that you would be able to leave it in good hands. And that's the sense that I get. I don't think that you would ever be able to leave the organization unless you felt that it was stable enough for you to leave it. And I think that there's a bit of, I think our own personal ego, sometimes we look at ourselves and think, oh, we're irreplaceable and yada, yada. But in some cases, there are organizations where the individual that leads it is such an important individual that if they did leave it, I don't know that it would survive. I think, and I'm not saying this to stroke your ego, because I'm not on the board. I've got no personal interest in anything, but I think it would take a lot to replace you. I really do, because you do have that drive and that dedication that, this thing has got to be humming. And that's the only scenario I could see where you would take another job, even for more money.
I mean, I appreciate that. I might take a leave, like, what do you call it, a sabbatical?
Right.
If I got offered a gig on Broadway for a short span, but that would mean I also had to have time to apply or to not apply, to audition, you know?
Right. But I think those are the types of scenarios where, I mean, and again, when you leave an organization too, I think that there's a number of reasons why you leave. You know, like for instance, I mean, I left the board at GoArt because we had a family health issue that my wife and I had to deal with. We didn't leave. We didn't leave out of anger or any of that kind of stuff. And I think the trajectory of the organization was good at that point. But I mean, like you said, if you get an offer like, oh, you know, he's on Broadway, I mean, who's going to say to you, oh, Gregory, you can't take the offer on Broadway. You got to stay here at GoArt because we can't survive without you.
I would be still calling probably at least once a week.
I know you would. I mean, but again, I think that's the importance of, you know, the dedication that you have to the organization. That's the bit of you that, you know, even having been in sales before, there's certain things that you can BS your way through. And I think especially a not-for-profit that is dependent on donations, community support, and everything like that, you have to have an ambassador that really is a good salesperson that can sell the organization. And they can only do that if they believe what they're doing or they believe in the organization. And I mean, there had to be a time in the beginning where it was really tough because you just, like you said, you didn't know if this thing was going to last month to month. I mean, that's kind of how it went.
Right. No, I mean, you're right, but we're good now. I mean, we're not good. We're great. We're headed in a really great direction. And I mean, we've still got a lot to do and a lot of growing and more money to raise to get us to a comfortable place, but we're headed there. Like the trajectory is going that way, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm just wondering, you know, when you look back, and it's amazing too, when you think about it, you made it through a pandemic, you're a not-for-profit organization. I mean, all those things, all those challenges that really, I mean, if the pandemic had occurred around the time that you were starting as executive director, there's no way on God's green earth the organization would have survived a year. So no. In many ways, you set the organization up to survive during the pandemic. And now as you come out, I mean, you're like every other place, like, okay, you know, these are some things that we couldn't do before that we can do now. So there's probably some of that excitement again, I would imagine. But I wonder, in looking back, what was the toughest decision that you had to make in terms of, you know, whether dealing with a budget or just something that you had to do in order for the organization to survive?
I mean, it gets a little personal.
As much as you want to share. I mean, obviously, I don't want you to, you know, I mean, you don't have to throw anybody under the bus, but.
No, I mean, it has to do with my personal life and my marriage. I mean, there was a lot of things going on with my marriage, but the time I put into this place, I know that it hindered my marriage. And I think about stuff like that, but there was a lot of things. So not getting personal, I mean, there was a lot of things happening, but I mean, so that was a hard moment. And I would say, and that was during COVID, because it was also like COVID's here, trying to figure out how to save this, what to do, and dealing with some medical issues of my own. And then the marriage that was collapsing, and I probably needed to take a break from my job in order to make that work. And I didn't. So I don't want to say I don't know if I made the right or wrong decision. But ultimately I made a decision, and we are still friends and everything's great. And we're co-parenting from a distance. But I mean, he had a whole bunch of medical issues with his family that he had to help and take care of. But yeah, I don't know how to say this in a better light. And it is personal, but we've figured it out, and I still love my job. I don't hold any grudges. Life took me to where I'm supposed to go. And ultimately it's because I'm going to be the president's husband someday. Right.
Well, and hopefully I'll get a cabinet position out of it, but
There you go.
But yeah, I think, but I think that your story in terms of like that balance between a marriage or parenting and a job and a passion and all that really isn't all that unusual. And I mean, I can say I relate to the guilt. I mean, I was divorced, and I often say that, and this may sound terrible, but sometimes you think, well, geez, if my spouse passed, at least I would look back and say, well, there's nothing I could do about it. They're dead. I couldn't have stopped it. As long as I'm not the perpetrator of their death, then it's over. But divorce does just have this kind of gross feeling, like it makes you feel like, if I'd done this differently, or if I'd taken this job, or if I'd done that. But
right.
I would say in my case, because I have many years removed from my divorce now, I've looked back and said, my wife knew who she married, the same as your husband knew who he married. I mean, you were dedicated to the job at the time that you got married, and ultimately that wasn't worth it to them, and they knew what the job meant to you. And so it just wasn't going to work, because if it wasn't that job, it was going to be something else. And it's good that you can get along and co-parent, because that's the important thing. But I hope you don't beat yourself up too long for choosing one or the other, but I can certainly understand and empathize with a lot of the guilt that you feel.
I wouldn't say that I thought I was choosing. I was doing what I thought I had to do, and that was here and my job and my kids. And I know that I should have given more attention, to him as well, but I didn't. It's hindsight, Like I know what I did, but there was so many other things, so I can't blame it all at once. But I put a lot. So when you were asking something, anything about my job, that's the one thing,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was thinking more along the lines of when I said the toughest decision, I meant sort of the toughest decision internally for the organization, like whether it was cutting a program or and doing anything like that. I mean, I know.
So you weren't going that way. Got it.
No, but that's okay. It went where it was supposed to go, because again, I think that's the magic of real conversations, is that you have real topics. It's not all this canned stuff that, well, I did this and I did that because I'm a wonderful leader. This is the reality of life. We all face challenges. We deal with guilt. We struggle with our parenting. There's all this baggage that comes along with it. But like you said, it's okay. Sometimes we're where we're supposed to be, even though maybe there's days it doesn't really feel like that.
So I would say there was decisions here where I had to lay off employees at times because of finances, and those were hard decisions, because I knew they had to happen to make things work. And thank God we've been able to bring back one of them, and the other one holds no grudges and still volunteers, but that was hard because we're such a small organization. Like, we have a small amount of people working here. So I know, as much as I'm the boss and I try to keep that relationship, it's hard not to become friends with the people that you see 10, 12 hours a day,
Yeah.
And you get close to them and you feel for them. And those were, for this place, those were my hardest decisions, having to do that. And yes, I mean, we've had to cut programs, and obviously those are hard decisions, but you feel guilty about them. But my heart was broken when I had to lay off people, and we've been able to mend it. So we're good. And I mean, that's always my intention. How can we get better? How can we fix things? How can we make something that we got rid of better the next time? And whether that's rehiring them back in a stronger way, or building a new program that's even better with different grant funding. Yeah.
I mean, I know, like, when I was in the restaurant business and I was a restaurant manager, dealing with letting an employee go was just, I mean, I hated it. I hated it with every ounce of my soul. But I said in your situation, it's tough because it's hard not to make it seem like it's personal because it feels personal to the other person. Maybe kind of the similar situation with a divorce. You know, these things happen, and sometimes it's just circumstances. It's nothing personal. You know, and it's the same when you lay an employee off. I mean, it's hard to convey the message that you go, hey, you know, listen, I really labored over this decision and I feel terrible, but I got to do what I got to do, which is the best for the long-term organization, which sometimes isn't what's best for an individual, which is, I feel you. I mean, that had to be really tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was.
So let's talk a little bit more about the successes then. So, I mean, are you able to kind of sit back and kind of accept some of the things that you've done and the successes that come along with it? I mean, does it, you know, I think, you know, sometimes people think, oh, you know, I don't want to brag too much or whatever, but I think you deserve a lot of credit for how you've kept this organization afloat. I mean, what's the thing you're the proudest of in terms of Go Art that you could say, man, I'm really glad that I did this?
I mean, I like bragging. I work my butt off, and I like bragging about what I do, you know. Trying to pinpoint one thing though, I don't know what that would be. I mean, saving the organization is a big one. Getting it to where it needed to be to exist, you know, so that we actually have money in our checking account and we're not in the red, you know. That was a big one, but also what I've done to the building, because I myself have done a lot of man hours. I've laid floors in the building. We did walls, painting. I mean, I fixed things, done everything I possibly can. When there's not a budget for it, you do it. But I mean, we've installed, since I've been here, there was one gallery when I started. And now there's 7 galleries. The bar is operating. We have a cafe. The kitchen is now a culinary kitchen that's operating. We have a library, a DM studio, film studio, podcast studio, music studio. I mean, I'm pretty proud of finding the grants. You know that, I guess, here we go. The number one thing that I'm proud of is learning to be a grant writer and getting grants, not just for Go Art, but for the Genesee and Orleans counties. Because I brought us from, like, what were we giving out? 40-something thousand in grants every year when I came, and now we're giving out nearly $108,000.
Wow.
So I guess writing these grants and getting the funding for us, that's something, it's uber exciting every time I get that grant announcement saying that we got the grant. I mean, obviously I write a ton that we don't get funded, but then I write a bunch that we do get funded. And when you get that award notice, it makes you feel amazing, because then that award notice is what helps me to create all this other stuff, what helps me to get us out of debt, what helps me to do all that. So getting the grants, yeah, that's my proudest thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll tell you on a personal note, you may or may not know this, but so my niece, we live in a town called Oakfield. It's a small town near Batavia, for those of you that aren't familiar with New York. And they purchased an old convenience store. They turned it into a food pantry, and the building was a little dilapidated. It's in the middle of a small town, so when you have an older building, it kind of looks lousy unless you do something with it. And my niece asked me if I'd be willing to write a small grant proposal to get a mural done on the side of the building. And it was a history mural. They had school kids that submitted designs, and the community really got behind it and participated in it. And as I drive down Main Street, I see that mural, which means, and I mean, you deserve some credit for that as well. I think that's pretty cool that you could have an impact on a community like that. Again, bringing the kids together from the school, making the community look a little bit better, putting some pride into the community. I mean, those are all the types of things that I think that, you know, they don't go noticed in the grand scale. You know, you're not going to see something in the Buffalo paper about it, but they certainly have a big impact on a little town.
Yeah.
So, so thank you. all these pauses, Greg. You're making me where I'm like, it's funny because every time you pause, I'm thinking to myself, did you ever do that when you're talking to somebody on the phone and they just don't reply right away, and for a moment you think, have I been talking to dead air for the last 5 minutes? But I know you're there.
It's because like you need to see my face, because I'll react with my face, and I at times forget that I'm on the phone and that people need to know that I'm reacting with my face over here and that I'm absorbing what you're saying. I mean, I have to give credit though. I mean, there's a ton of amazing organizations in Genesee and Orleans County, not just arts and cultural, but in general, nonprofits that put on arts and cultural events or happenings in general. And so I find the money, I write the grants to get the money to give out to them, but then they create it. So it's really awesome to say that I had a hand in so many different things, but they make that possible for me to have my hand in all of those things. They have to apply to us to get that funding to do it. So it's kind of cool to have the opportunity to do that and to be part of it and to go to something and say, I kind of helped make this happen. You know, I didn't do anything with this, but I applied and got the money to give out to them. Like, it's kind of cool, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I've done my fair share of grant writing, and it's not easy. And I know when you put in a ton of work, and then when you don't get the grant, it's like you're. I mean, I don't know about you, but my mind always goes to, man, that was a waste of time, you know. But like you said, the reality is that that's what you have to do. You can't get discouraged. You just got to keep keep taking the shots, going for the bigger ones. And you know, I remember we used to have conversations about this when I was on the board, and I mean, you were right. You always go for a lot more than you want, so that you at least get close to what you want.
Right. But you still have to have a realistic budget when you ask for a lot more, you know, because then if it happens. But I wanted to say a funny story, like what you're saying. You get 20% of the grants you apply for. That's like the average. And I one time, that's exactly, you're like, what a waste of time. I spent all this time. And I forwarded the response that I got on a grant to a friend of mine that worked with me on the grant, that I had asked her to review it and give me suggestions. And I forwarded to her. I'm like, what a freaking waste of time. You know, I did all this, spent all this time doing this, did all this, and this is what they give me in response. And then to be absolutely mortified when I realized that I included the people that sent the grant notification to me. Absolutely mortified that they got that response. And I just say, oh my God, obviously there's nothing to say except that this was not meant for you. And you've got to know what it feels like to have this. And I would never, ever, ever say that to someone. And I can't believe that this got sent back to you. That was just the personal thing. I am so sorry. And it was absolutely mortifying. I got no response. So I have no idea. Thank gosh it was a one-time grant opportunity, you know, that it wasn't something that I would apply to again in the future. Otherwise I might have messed that up, but I will never do something like that again. I will just say that in my head and I will not say it out loud.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. Yeah, I worked with somebody at a huge not-for-profit agency. I mean, thousands of employees, and they'd sent out an email about the health insurance costs going up and pay being frozen that year. And she wrote this scathing, like, oh, so my health insurance cost is going to go up. And then, so that sounds like a pay cut to me. And she had meant to send it to her friend, but she literally sent it to the entire agency. So if there's a lesson to be learned out there, listeners, always make sure before you hit send that you didn't hit reply all before you hit send.
I've done that, and I don't know what possessed me not to double check that.
Well, it's anger. I mean, it goes back to what we were saying. It's like you've put all this time into it, and even though in your head I got a 20% chance of getting it. When you don't, it hurts, especially if you really feel like you've got a great proposal. Yeah. But I think also what maybe if you look at the silver lining on it, maybe those people needed to know that. To just send some kind of generic email to somebody like, hey, sorry, we didn't pick you for the grant this year, I think on some level doesn't reflect very well on an organization either. I've applied for grants and they've said we didn't get it. And sometimes I even get a phone call. They'll say, hey, look, we'd love to fund you, but this was a situation. nothing personal. Please reapply next year. Those are the things that you want. So even though you don't get it, you go, well, at least they read it. Whereas if you just get this basket response, like, yeah, sorry, you're not one of the people we chose. It's like, did you even read this thing? So, I mean, I understand your frustration. I think it's warranted on a lot of levels.
Well, I think most places are good like that.
Yeah, I agree.
Like honestly, remember what they had said to me at the point. It was a few years ago. I just remember not taking it well and thinking that I was just getting my frustration out with my friend and that no one else would ever know that I said anything.
Well, now we all know. What's the name of the organization so we can put it out publicly? No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
If I did remember, I still would not tell you.
Yeah, you'd be like, no, I'm not gonna broadcast this. All right, so we're kind of getting near the end here, and I'll thank you in advance. I love chatting with you. I really do. So these are the people I picked to be on my podcast. Or I mentioned in an earlier episode, I said, I just like talking to people with a microphone that I would like to talk to without a microphone. So thank you. But why don't you talk to me a little bit about the kids and maybe do some bragging there and kind of how the whole parenting journey's been going and how that's been driving you and how you incorporate them into Go Art. Because I'm sure when you're doing renovations, they're some part of it in some way, shape, or form. I mean,
I don't want to get in trouble with child labor law.
Well, it's not child labor. We'll sit there and just tell everybody you're Amish or something. Maybe that you'll get around the law. But you know what I mean. We joke.
My daughter actually has brought that up a couple times. I'm like, we're volunteering. You're volunteering, and she's like, oh. Yesterday we had to empty the attic because they're doing HVAC renovations at Go Art, and my two kids helped me empty. I mean, we each probably made 250 trips, and I'm not lying, up and down the stairs and bringing stuff up and down. And they're pretty amazing. As much as they might complain about doing stuff, they do it, and they're exposed to so many different things. I mean, I have multiple proud moments. There was a nude on the wall, and my daughter walks in, and I'm like, here it comes. You know what I'm saying? She's going to look at this. I had already pre-called my mom and said, what do I do? There's a nude on the wall. What do I say? She's like, you say nothing, because if you bring attention to it, it's going to become something. So don't say anything. So my daughter comes in and she stops in front of the nude and is staring at it. And I'm like, okay. She turns around. She goes, don't you think that's a little inappropriate? And this was when she was 4 or 5, maybe. And I look at her, I go, well, it's art. And we start discussing it. And then she goes, no. And she was looking at the piece right next to it. And she goes, no, the person's smoking. And I thought she was looking at the nude. And she was all upset because there was someone smoking. And isn't that inappropriate for me to have in a gallery that's open to the public that kids could see someone smoking? And I was like, oh. And I'm like, yes, because I don't believe in smoke. I don't think smoke is good. I'm really avidly against it. So we had a conversation, but I was like sitting there and I'm like, so you don't think anything about this painting? She goes, well, yeah, that one's interesting too. She goes, if you look at the way she's standing there, it's almost like her feet are planted into the ground. And it's like she's Mother Nature. Like her feet are going to become the roots and her arms are the branches of the tree. And I was like, wow. I mean, that was pretty intense. And I thought, wow, I'm doing pretty good with this kid. Like she's coming up with this stuff, And at one point in time, when I got a job offer and we were discussing it as a family, she had said, her and my son, they were like, well, what about creative arts camp? Will we still have creative arts camp? And I'm like, wait, you guys fight me on this every morning going to that. And they're like, well, yeah, because we've done it a million times. I'm like, I know. So then why are you going to miss it? They're like, well, don't let it get to your head, but we kind of like it, even though we complain about it.
Wow.
And we were at Walmart once, and my daughter insisted on getting this Barbie doll. And I asked her, I'm like, do you know who this is? And she's like, yeah, it's Frida Kahlo. I'm like, how do you know who Frida Kahlo is? She goes, well, in Creative Arts Camp, we learned who Frida Kahlo is. And you know that she's not just an artist, but she's also an activist. And started going through all this stuff with me. And I'm like, this is pretty impressive. So those moments when my kids just are smart and know a ton, and they are super smart. My son is smart. He's I would say, most popular kid in school, not just with the kids, but with the teachers. And my daughter had such a proud moment. Virtual learning was such a struggle for my kids. And she was doing bad. She was doing bad in third grade. We get back in fourth grade, and at the end of, or in like 3 months in, she got a letter home saying that she was in the top percentage of the class, and they were doing an after school group for, I don't know what the correct word would be, but for
probably honor roll or something.
Yeah, there you go. And I mean, for being in the top 10 kids or something like that. And I sat there and I literally cried. She's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, 3 months ago, you were failing. And you got back in here and you worked your butt off and got yourself back up to this. And I'm like, you did that. You did that. Because I don't know this stuff that she's learning. I try to help. She asked me for help and I have to Google it. But she did it. So my kids, pretty freaking incredible. They're both gorgeous kids. I don't know how you adopt 2 kids and end up with 2 very attractive kids. My daughter is extremely tall. I think she's 5'3" the last we measured her, and she's 9 in fourth grade. So I'm pretty sure she's going to be taller than me. My son, he's still a little bit below average, so I don't know what'll come of him, but I don't know. I'm proud of them every minute of every day. I am constantly calling family and friends and saying, "Oh my gosh, guess what they did today? Guess what they said?" They're so amazing. I'm so proud to be their dad. And when you hear people say, "Oh," like in general, people will comment, "Oh, they're so lucky to have got you as their parent when they're in the foster." I'm like, no. That's not how it works at all. I am so freaking lucky to have gotten them.
Yeah.
Like, they are my everything. And I got them. It was my luck. I'm the one that's blessed to have gotten them. They, it wasn't for them. It was, I'm the lucky one. And yeah, they're going to be, my daughter has had a dream of being, working for NASA since I think she was 3. And that dream hasn't left. She plans to work for NASA. My son wants to be, like I said, the president or stuntman. Once in a while, a policeman or a fireman get thrown in there. But they're not underachieving with what they want to do, Yeah. And then I hear them both sing in the shower, and they're both got really good voices. And I am just unbelievably excited. I'm not rushing. I always say to my kids, I'm like, please do not wish away time. When they're like, "Oh, I can't wait for tomorrow. I wish it was tomorrow already," or "I wish it was next week." I'm like, no, don't do that. Time flies too fast. But at the same time, I can't wait to see what they become, because I know that they're going to be 2 amazing people in this world.
Awesome. Well, you know what? I'm happy for you. They got an amazing dad, and I know other people tell you that too. So I'm happy to call you my friend, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast, and a lot of great stuff for people to think about and whatnot. But man, the parenting stuff, yeah, it rings home for me too, even though my kids weren't adopted. I think, you sum it up that a lot of times we think that we're supposed to be teaching our kids stuff, and man, they teach us things. They give us these new perspectives, and I guess the trite phrase is making us feel young again, looking at the world more through the lens of a ideal young person who has their life ahead of them, as opposed to, us being so caught up in the moment and angry at everything else that's around us. And I'm experiencing that with my granddaughter. 4 years old. And let me tell you, man, I didn't want to have to ever change a diaper again. To me, it was just, I just dreaded it. But, I fell in love with that little bugger the second I saw her little eyes staring at me. So I feel you. And I'm not, you don't want to rush the grandparenting thing, but, sneak preview, it's pretty darn cool too. So you got that to look forward to as well.
They love that. So I can imagine. Imagine.
Well, awesome. Well, again, Gregory, I still would just want to call you Greg without the "-ry", But from me to you, here's a hug through the air. You won't actually physically have to hear it, feel it, but the next time I see you, I'll give you an actual physical hug.
Oh, I know you will.
But I definitely want to thank you. And for everybody out there, thank you very much for listening. I hope you continue to enjoy these podcasts as much as I enjoy making them. I'm just having some great conversations and creating some great moments, I hope. So until next time, this is your host, Thom Jennings. Thanking you very much for listening to the Bagel Logic podcast, and we'll see you next time.